Hello, everyone. Welcome. Before we get started, y'all, we have to acknowledge a birthday in the house today. The dog that made this program possible, this conversation possible, these initiatives possible. Today is Miss Maddie's birthday. Happy birthday, Maddie. You're still living on through all your work, through all of our work, and we'll continue to celebrate your legacy for many, many more years to come. Happy birthday, Miss Maddie. Hosting our For Rights, Right Time discussion today is one of the founding partners of the Maddie's Million Pet Challenge, Dr. Kate Hurley. You probably know Dr. Hurley as one half of the dynamic duo that launched the Million Cat Challenge so many years ago. But those of us lucky enough to work with her know her as the lady that won't get out of those cat pants no matter what stage of the pandemic we're in. Dr. Hurley has been leading the Cret Shelter Medicine Program for 21 years now, so I guess she can do whatever the heck she wants. You're captain of the Learniverse and our captain of all things tech, data, productivity, training, organization, life hacking, Amazon. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, I'm not. No, really. Please meet, if you haven't already, Maddie's Million Pet Challenge Director of Online Learning, Dr. Cindy Delaney.
Hello.
And also joining us today, we have two guests, Dr. Ginger White, Director of Shelter Medicine at Santa Barbara County Animal Services, and Jenna Jones, Animal Care Behavior and Training Manager at Broward County Animal Care and Adoption Center. Welcome, Ginger and Jenna. Oh, and there's Pirate. Hey, Pirate. Okay, without further ado, Dr. Delaney, take it away. I'm so sorry, Dr. Hurley, take it away.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for being here at the right time and in the right place. I'm going to just do a quick overview of what the right time sort of includes, because we wanted to focus most of this webinar on giving you one tool that you can really use to achieve it. So we'll go pretty quick through the beginning. What is the right time? Well, it's the time that allows services to be provided in alignment with three things: animal need, human need, and shelter capacity. And we, for better or worse, we don't get to pick one or the other. We really have to do our best to balance all of those three factors. And we considered three elements of the right time. It has three pieces to it. So there's the right time to come into the shelter. So you've decided the shelter is the right place. You watched the last webinar and you're like, yes, shelter is the right place for this one. But what is the right time for the animal to come in? Then what is the right amount of time for the animal to spend in the shelter? And what is the right time to leave? And that really comes down to outcomes by appointment, or the role of that. We've already talked quite a bit about appointments, so we're not going to belabor this right now, but I just want to emphasize this is not only such an important part of making sure we're serving animals in the right place, but it's fundamental to make sure that we're serving animals at the right time, is to be able to offer appointment-based services for non-emergencies. And so I wanted to say just a couple of things about that. Most professional services are by appointment, right? For getting our hair cut, for going to the doctor, for going to the DMV. It's not something that should be only implemented in an emergency situation, and not something that should be discontinued as some things go back to normal as the pandemic continues to evolve. So for those of you who are struggling with that message from your stakeholders, maybe your elected officials, it's really important to make that case that this is just now a standard practice for successful professional services and balancing the many complex demands that are placed on sheltering systems. And really, not just like a human right, but a humane right in order to provide conditions that are fair to both animals and staff. We published this paper in order to provide you with support for this practice, maybe with people who haven't been part of the whole conversation and evolution of intake by appointment, to really make those connections between intake by appointment at shelters and in other contexts. And this was just a little bit of feedback that I got from one person after reading the paper, saying, yes, shortened length of stay, happier animals, huge boost in staff morale, really does need to be our new normal. Something that's been a struggle is that intake by appointment has coincided with a historic shortage in veterinary services and staffing. It's not just us. Everybody is struggling with staffing levels right now, but there's a tendency to conflate that intake by appointment is the reason that services are not able to be provided in a timely way. I hope that makes sense. So if the shelter says, you know what, we're booked 3 months out to be able to take in your owner's surrendered pet, the solution for that really needs to be more staff, more access to veterinary services, so we can shorten the time frame to be able to get animals in, spayed and neutered, and back out the door. Going back to unregulated intake will only overfill shelters and overburden already overstretched systems. So I think that's an important thing for us to be messaging to our communities. This happened at the same time. Intake by appointment is one way of managing in a condition where we have a severe shortage of staffing. It didn't cause it. We also need to not sort of rest on the fact that, well, we'll just push it all off until the future and not continue to work to resolve the lack of staffing, the lack of veterinary services that are holding us back from providing the level of care that we want to be able to provide. Then the next piece, once we've got them in at the right time, we want them to spend the right amount of time in the shelter. That's going to be the topic of most of today's presentation, is one crucial tool we can use to make sure that we achieve this goal. But for this part of it, I will just say, the right time in the shelter is 2 things. It is as short as possible, because nobody wants to spend extra time in confinement, no matter how good it is, and as long as needed. It's not about, in any way, rushing animals to an outcome that is not the best possible outcome that we can achieve for them. And by providing a short stay for those animals that don't need a lot of care to get ready for an appropriate live outcome, we can have the luxury of being able to take as long as needed for those animals that do need some extra care. And then finally, I'll spend just a little more time on the right time to leave the shelter. And here we're really balancing 2 things that might seem to be in conflict. When we talk about adoptions by appointment, was for me, one of the surprising revelations of the early days of the pandemic, when shelters had to shut down. Intake by appointment was to me, an obvious thing, and something that we have been encouraging and working towards since the early days of the Million Cat Challenge, and even before through managed admissions. But the fact that there were a lot of benefits reported by going to adoption by appointment surprised me, but it shouldn't have, because we know that on the one hand, people need to see the animals to connect with them, but also animals need rest and quiet, and staff really benefit from the predictability brought about by appointments. This was published sometime before the pandemic, but just noting that kennel noise levels were lower when visitor access to the kennel area was restricted, and dogs displayed behavior indicating improved welfare during that time. Dogs and cats are not 24/7 on kind of creatures. They actually need a lot more sleep than you and I do. And so the unpredictable rhythm of guests and people coming, and it's like somebody knocking at the door every 10 minutes at home, it gets chaotic and the animals get stressed and exhausted. And benefits to staff. This is from a report from the Los Angeles County Department of Animal Care and Control, noting that the care centers became less chaotic, staff were better able to perform their daily tasks, without interruption. And there was even a reduction of injuries by 44% because staff are less rushed and prone to injury. And in a context where we're struggling to retain staff, giving staff the time to do a good job is so important. So this really is starting to look like a win-win situation, right? Live release rates, this is also from the same report from the Department of Animal Care and Control in Los Angeles County, increased from 54% to 68% for cats, while dog live release rates remained steady at 88%, even though it was working with a more challenging pool of dogs because many friendly, non-dangerous dogs were resolved through community-based solutions during that time. But just want to go back to that first principle that people do need to be able to see the animals in order to make a connection. Again, this is a study that came out some time ago, looking at the reason people chose to adopt the pet that they chose. And the blue bars in the left-hand graph is dogs. The blue bars are cats. The red bars are dogs. And you can see for cats, strongly behavior for people was the number one reason. And that's not something that you can see just on a post. And specifically for adult cats, over here, we see that approached and greeted was the number one reason why an adult cat was chosen for adoption. But even for dogs, behavior with people, personality and temperament, very important reasons why people connected with a particular animal that can't be conveyed just by scrolling through photographs or even videos on a website. So we need to balance this in a hybrid approach. We can still give animals some quiet time to be able to rest, maybe to have volunteers come in and read stories to the animals or spend some quiet time in real life rooms, just chilling out like animals need to do. We can also offer appointments at a variety of times, including same day and instant appointments for people who struggle to plan ahead, and allow walkthroughs with appointments. Don't make people select the animal based on just looking at a picture. And also consider offering select walk-in hours during a time when things are already sort of lively, and we can accommodate that with both the staff schedule and the animal schedule. Again, it doesn't have to be from first thing in the morning till last thing at night. There can be periods of rest and periods of activity. And look out for bottlenecks either way. If staff to escort people on walkthroughs is a limiting factor, think about ways that you can allow easier access. And on the other hand, if staff to sort of manage the chaos of walkthroughs and process those appointments is a concern, then think about shrinking the number of walk-in hours, or so that you can focus more staff on that particular time period. Hopefully that makes some sense. And then continue to revisit this. Adoption by appointment is a program that is still evolving. And this is a later report from the same Los Angeles Department of Animal Care and Control, encouraging staff to be as flexible as possible in just working with the different needs that come to them, and evaluating data weekly and adjusting as more information emerges. So for instance, Los Angeles County found that there was a 51% no-show rate for appointments. And so they doubled the amount of appointments available and accommodated more walk-ins. And I want to close this section with the power of even just making one change in hours, one change in the practices. This particular example is a shelter that just stopped taking in surrenders on weekends so they could focus completely on adoptions 2 days a week. Didn't receive much pushback at all, actually did a lot more adoptions, and the adopters as well as the staff were more comfortable and happier. So win-win. And now I want to turn it over to Dr. Delaney and our special guests, because really taking time out of the middle, reducing the amount of time that it takes animals to get to a positive outcome, shrinks the population in the shelter in a healthy and positive way. And it allows more time for staff to think and figure and process and discuss. and work on programs on either end of the equation, on intake and on outcomes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Kate. So I am Dr. Cindy Delaney, and hopefully if you have found your way here, you are also attending the other webinars in this series. We had Right Place 2 weeks ago. This one is the Right Time. And then we've got Right Care and then Right Outcome coming up every 2 weeks. So we're really excited to bring that to you. And we're going to really delve a little bit deeper into Right Time right now. Kate did mention there's kind of 3 major components of right time to enter, right amount of time to stay, and right time to leave. And each of those has its own programming, policies, and practices. They're going to help that become a reality and help you in your goals of what you want to do in those areas of really adhering to that right time of animal sheltering. So in the rest of this segment, we're going to dive deep into what I think is one of the most important programs that has to do with how long the animals stay in our shelter. As Kate said, and I love this, like how succinct this is, but like the right time to stay in the shelter is as short as time as possible, but as long as needed to get what they need. So that's super important for us to keep in mind when we're talking about this. You know, it all starts with making sure the animals actually have to be in the shelter. And if not, help them elsewhere. But for those who really need to come in and really need to get services from you on site, we want to make sure that they're moving towards their appropriate outcome as quickly as possible. We want them to get their care they need and then go ahead and go on to their appropriate outcome, not stay in the shelter. And it's super important because every day or night that an animal spends in a shelter, they're at some increased risk of having a medical issue, an emotional concern, or developing a behavior issue, or having an existing behavior issue get worse. Shelters are a confinement setting. We don't always think about that, but they're not that much different than like a laboratory or a zoo or a kennel or a vet clinic. They are inherently stressful and they are just not great environments for animals. No matter how nice we try and make them, they're just not the same as being outside of a confinement area. So really important. And what we have found from the research we've done in our program over the past 20 years or more is that one of the most powerful tools we have to help animals move through the shelter is daily rounds. So just a quick question, and we'll pop up a little poll question about how many of you are doing daily rounds and how often you're doing them. So does your shelter perform daily rounds? And then if you do, how many days a week are you doing it? And if no, go ahead and give us that answer and be super honest, because we just want to know what's going on out there so that we can help where we can. Okay, let's see what our results are. Okay, so 35% are doing it 7 days a week. Amazing and awesome. I'm super happy for you guys. 14% are almost there. You're kind of doing the work week thing, which I feel, I know that can happen quite a bit. 10%, 3 to 4 days a week. 16%, like once a week or twice a week. 22%, not regularly. Okay. And then 4% never. Okay. Could be much worse. So that is a great starting place for us. So I honestly think that other than the very basic care of like feeding, watering, and cleaning, daily rounds are like the most important thing you can do in a shelter, because we want those animals to get what they need and then move on through. So what I did the other day is I was sitting down with a couple of friends on Zoom, and we got into a really good discussion about daily rounds. And so I actually just taped the discussion, and I am going to go ahead and share that with you because some really great and important points came up. And I was like, we need to just let people just eavesdrop on this, because this is some really some good stuff that we actually ended up working through. So if I can do this correctly, I am gonna share. You know, there are certain ways that when we talk about rounds, like we say, oh, you should do it, exactly this way, like, 2 or 3 members from each department or something like that. But it's hard to do that. Yeah. And it's freaking hard to do it every single day because everybody is so busy and everybody has different schedules. And it's like, for me anyway, when I'm doing rounds, like, it's more important for me that they happen.
Yeah.
every day or as much as possible than that we have like the exact perfect team doing them.
We started rounds probably, I don't know, 6-ish months ago now, which was a bit of growing pains too, because like you mentioned, it's really hard to kind of find time to get the people that you want there. And I don't think a lot of them really saw the value in it at first. So we started just doing them like 3 days a week. And pretty soon people were like, oh no, this actually seems like a really good thing. Like we're kind of getting more from it. And so now we do them every day. Kind of how we're doing them. There's 4 of us that go pretty much every day. And then more people that join as they can. So as their kind of schedule allows. And so the main departments that we have attend, I'm there. We have the lead tech who joins in, one of the field supervisors, and then the alternative placement team, so like rescue, foster, transport. And then we also sometimes have the kennel supervisors, sometimes kennel staff as they get time, other techs, things like that. It just kind of depends when they can fit it into their schedule. So a solid, 3 to 4 of us every day doing that. And we start from top to bottom. We walk through, look at every animal in the building, talk about behavior, medical, if there's any kind of barriers that we see in place, reasons why they haven't been adopted or maybe transferred to another agency. And then we kind of divide up that action list based on department. And usually we send out kind of a roundup email at the end of that too, to loop in our vets on staff and anyone who wasn't there. That way we're trying to kind of divvy out the work and make sure everyone gets the information they need, and that we're getting as many set of eyes as possible on the animals that we're really trying to get in somewhere else, basically.
How many animals do you guys take in a year? Do you know that?
We're about like 15,000.
What would be your average population of dogs versus cats sitting in the shelter?
So our cat population actually, since I've started, has stayed pretty steady. We're usually sitting, I would say, like average 50 cats in the building. Dogs, our capacity for care is like 106. We've kind of been fluctuating above that and under that.
Do you guys use any special reports to help you with daily rounds, or what do you use when you're doing your rounds?
Yeah, so we have a kennel inventory that has like every animal filter for animals in the building. So we usually pull that to just have an idea of numbers, but it also shows, if they're still on their stray weight, if they have a hold pending, which usually is like transfer, rescue, or adoption, and those things. So that we do use that to kind of be able to cipher through who really needs our resources, who already has like an outcome.
Can you tell me like some of the things, what are you looking at or for when you're walking through on your rounds?
Mm-hmm. So again, like I have a little bit of a behavior lens, so I'm always looking, behaviorally, kind of where are they at? Are they improving? Are they deteriorating? Do we need to make changes that way as far as like what we can manage and things we can change? We're also always, looking at any medical concerns. So nasal discharge, coughing, pulling their paw up, all that good stuff. I think we're also looking kind of for stagnant movement. So, hey, this animal, we've seen this animal for a week now, and we haven't really, nothing, they don't have anything in the works for them. How do we kind of better promote them? Is there a better location for them in the kennel? Is there some sort of like something on the cage card that maybe is deterring people from being interested? So trying to look at like stagnant movement and maybe any unintended barriers that are kind of being thrown up for that animal to get out.
During rounds or at any time, is somebody else checking for some of kind of like more the administrative stuff? Are the due out dates correct? Is the proper hold on the animal? Was the proper condition put in the computer? Mm-hmm. Was it scanned for a chip? Did it get its intake care? Like, when does that come into this?
Yeah, that's usually myself and the lead tech are usually doing that in between too. So when a new animal comes in, I guess her and I are a little bit compulsive about that, like pulling that up right away and making sure that those dates are correct and seeing if we have scanned for a chip. And if we have we got in contact with those people? Have we put out door knockers? have we actually been out to the house to see if we can just drop the animal back off to its people. So we're doing that pretty much every day, every other day, but that's something too, when that animal first comes in, we're checking, and then we're kind of trying to keep up with during rounds if like, hey, we couldn't scan that animal quite yet because that animal was super scared, FAS 5, we gave it some time to chill, like have we circled back and done that today then?
Ginger, what is your official title at Santa Barbara?
Director of Shelter Medicine. Basically, I'm just the vet that's here the most.
That's awesome. Okay. I'll tell you, my impression when I would do daily rounds is that depending on how well you have things running, probably 70 to 80% or more of the animals, you're kind of looking at them as you go and you're like, oh, you're fine. You're fine. You're on the right pathway. You're all set. You're good. Mm-hmm. But then there was like another 10 to 20 that were kind of your problem children where you had to like think and make decisions and speak to somebody else. What's your impression on your daily rounds? Like, what's the percentages of like, oh, you're doing great, or I have to actually solve something for you?
Yeah, I would say 70 to 80% are the ones that like you're on the right pathway. There aren't any like concerning medical or behavior things that we're seeing right now. We're not seeing any kind of obvious barriers to why you aren't moving through or things that we can do. And that other chunk definitely like medical or behavior things that we have to kind of triage and move around and think that way. And another chunk of like we were talking about, like the due date out is wrong, or, hey, we haven't done all we can to kind of reunite this pet with their owner, things like that we're trying to fine tune. So that's a smaller number in the future.
Okay. And you said that your team of 3 or 4 people typically each day, do you have a set time that you do rounds? Like you're like, okay, 8 o'clock every day, or what do you do?
Yeah, we found that like 11 o'clock every day works best for everyone.
Okay. And if I had to put you on the spot and say, okay, what is one thing about how you do rounds that you think everybody should do? Because it's like worked so well for you, or, one of those things that's like you think is really a bright spot about the way you do rounds.
Again, this is probably just behavior lens specifically, but we take treats and toys with us on rounds every day and hand those out to the animals. So trying to just do some nice, classical conditioning of people passing your cage means good things for you. But also we've seen the dogs are, kind of expecting that at that time of day too. So we've kind of created a routine. They're coming to the front of the cage. They're offering sits for us, hand targets through the cage and things like that. So I would encourage anyone that does rounds to do that. It's a pretty easy thing to do if you're already walking through. And it adds a bright spot to our day for sure.
Well, and especially if you're doing a team approach, it can be pretty intimidating for the animals to have like 3 or 4 people march up to their cage and then kind of stare at them, and yeah. I'm sure you're doing all the right things, but still it can be like an intimidating set of people. So that's really cool that you do that. I love that so much.
Thanks. Yeah.
Very cool. Okay. Here's the other flip side. What is a challenge that you find with rounds in general, or the way you're doing it right now?
Yeah. I think ideally, we'd have more people on round just on the regular. Again, we have our 3 to 4, which is great. And I think we try and do a lot of follow-up at the end, but it's not quite the same as being there more often and putting eyes and kind of being in the trenches, if you want to, kind of seeing that firsthand, which I think is the more people that are kind of seeing that and helping pathway plan, the more kind of out of the box ideas that you garner. So I think that would be a big one. And also probably, again, I think it's easy to kind of get into the routine of like, you're fine, but trying to really, our animals with longer lengths of stay, while they might not have any concerning behavior or medical, like really trying to find a way that once we hit a certain length of stay, okay, what are we kind of changing up for them? That way we can help their stay be more comfortable, but also really try and find a route out of the shelter for them too.
And how long does rounds take on a typical day for you guys?
Usually 45 minutes to an hour.
Okay, that's super efficient. That's interesting and good. That's good to hear. And then how long would you say the typical follow-up is for whoever's doing a lot of the like getting things on an action list and, a to-do list kind of thing?
Mhm. I would say probably another like 45 minutes to an hour, depending on what we have for the day. Usually we try and split it up, which helps a lot.
And then you kind of do farm out the to-do list to the different people who that it's their thing.
Yes. Yeah. We create a list for everyone. That way everyone can kind of have an idea of what's going on in this section or this section, what this person is doing for this animal. But like the actual ask of people is definitely given to specific departments or people whose job kind of most closely resembles that need there.
Awesome. All right. Well, let me grab Ginger in here. And so Ginger, you want to just tell me like, what is the story of Browns over at Santa Barbara right now?
It's evolved quite a bit. So when I first started working full time here, that was 2015, and there was no type of rounds happening at all, nothing formally. That was one of my first things that I did was write a policy / protocol for doing daily wellness rounds. Back in 2015, 16, we did have a lot more of our positions filled than we did now. So we had more of a team approach. It was just not daily. It was more like once or twice at our largest shelter. The 2 satellite shelters was once a week. And sometimes it was just me, but I would try to pull in the shelter supervisor and potentially outreach coordinator if they were there that day. But at the larger shelter, it was really myself and or one of the RVTs, the shelter supervisor, the outreach coordinator. We would do rounds about 9 o'clock in the morning, print out our census from Chameleon. And I just like to have a report that would show me their intake date so that could give me an idea of how long they were there. And our walkthroughs were pretty quick, making sure that the kennels were labeled in the correct kennel, all of those sorts of housekeeping things, and then figuring out what that animal needs and just visually seeing how they're doing and how they look in the kennel was a big benefit. It felt like rounds took a lot longer, of course, when we had higher numbers because there was more to walk through and see. At one point, we had a volunteer that would follow with us and with a copy of the census, and she would make notes on things that were easy for her to help do in terms of action items after the rounds. She could update things in Chameleon. She could update names and things like that. So that was really helpful when we had that volunteer, because otherwise after rounds, when we would scatter, it would be hard to assign those action items to people and make sure they got done. Like for anything veterinary related, I would be making notes and highlighting like, okay, this animal has diarrhea. That one's not scheduled for spay, kind of tallying up all the veterinary related things. And then if, animals that need outreach or they need behavior consults, those other things kind of needed to be assigned to somebody. Or we also have animals that are on like bite quarantines and being held for hearings and things like that, but those need to be followed up on to be like, well, where are we with this hearing? Does somebody need to be contacted just to make sure they're moving through and they're not just waiting in that kennel, following up with owners, like, do you need help building a fence? What is it that you need where we can get your dog back to you? Those are more of shelter supervisor things, or, somebody else that can complete those tasks. So after COVID, we have less numbers, but we have a lot less staff. So a lot of times rounds is myself and our head RVT. There's some days where it feels really solid. We've got myself, the RVT, the shelter supervisor, outreach coordinator, and the behaviorist. So if those days feel super productive, just walking by and actually seeing how those dogs are doing in the kennel. Do they have kennel stress? Are they improving in terms of their kennel appearance, and those sorts of things is super helpful. But now we are, again, like losing some more staff. So even if we don't have anyone else on the team, it's valuable for myself and the RVT to be able to do that walkthrough, because we like to know who's in the shelter. We right now have, we have 40 dogs right now, 11 cats, 5 rabbits. So that's not a huge number. So you can have a feel for those animals, like who's here, what they need, who's coming up on the surgery schedule, how everyone's doing. For a while, the outreach coordinator wanted to combine case management with rounds. Case management used to be a separate meeting once a week for animals that were not moving through, mostly behavior type dogs that we needed to kind of sit down and talk about what's our plan, how's it going, what else can we do to try and get them ready for adoption, talk to other transfer partners, things like that. So she wanted to combine it, I think, to try and save time. But what I found is when we would walk through, we were still just sort of walking through and saying, well, you need outreach, but it wasn't making more of the plans. I think it's still more valuable to keep that separate, to have a case management meeting where we sit down and talk about the quote unquote problem dogs, but really to try and flush out what we can do for them, what we haven't tried, and that sort of thing. So I think for me, I'd like to do rounds if we can, early in the day so we can pick up on problems. For me, I'd like to walk by and see, oh, that cat looks like it's not feeling well. I need to do an exam on that cat today. I like to know those things earlier in the day. Or your incision doesn't look good, or you ate your e-collar, like that sort of stuff I like to see in the morning so I can address it later.
How many animals do you guys take in each year?
I think we average around like 5,000 to 6,000, I think.
And what do you think maybe your total population is between the two locations on a daily basis?
So dogs, I think it's going to fluctuate between, 50 to 70 perhaps. And then cats, we've been keeping it pretty low. It's been going well. That I'm sure that'll increase with the summer. And then most of our kittens are in foster.
And let me ask you kind of the same question that I was asking Jenna. What do you feel about the way that you guys are doing your daily rounds is a bright spot that others could benefit from doing?
I think it's just the physical walkthrough, I think, is so important to walk through and see the animals, because I know the shelter supervisor, part of what they try to stay on top of every day is looking at our census to make sure that animals are getting named and turned over to available, and just kind of making sure on a paper standpoint that everything looks as it should there, which is important. But I think the actual physical walkthrough, and you can inspect the facility and how those animals actually look and how they're doing in their cages, and then kind of get to know them a little bit, because I'm also part of the team that's going to evaluate, for adoptability, or if we need to talk about if an animal is adoptable or not, or what issues they're having. If I've seen them regularly and how they might be either improving or deteriorating, and I can see how they're looking and kind of get to know them, because we have small numbers, I'm able to do that. I think there's a huge benefit to that versus almost reverting to that like virtual rounds of just looking at the census and the numbers, like, okay, you've been here this many days. You don't have a feel for how that animal's really doing and if we're meeting their needs the way that we should be in the shelter.
When I was looking at my shelter also, I almost felt like it was kind of almost easy to separate into two pieces. And one was kind of the admin, data entry, checking for issues part, which a lot of that you can actually automate using like postmaster jobs that like look for mistakes and email the person who made the mistake and or their supervisor. So there's like that admin part, like, are your dates correct? Is your hold correct? Do we give you a name when we're supposed to, where you check for a microchip? And then there's the other part, which is like that hands-on, eyes-on. So depending on how busy a shelter is, you can almost like have somebody in the front office or elsewhere at a desk do some of the admin part, so that the physical part of going through the shelter and actually looking at the animals can go more smoothly. So there's a way to kind of break it up a little bit if resources are an issue, which I don't know any shelter right now where they're not an issue.
Right. That makes sense. And we have so much turnover of our kennel staff. They're not always up to speed and getting trained to notice kennel stress, or even know how to set up that cat kennel so that the cat has the hidey bed in the right place so they can hide, and they might not pick up on the stresses of animals that are not doing well. That way I can see it and make changes and teach them at the same time.
Do you guys have any kind, either one of you, do you have any kind of a daily monitoring sheet that goes on animals' cages?
I have one, but we only use it for animals that are struggling. So it's not for every animal, but animals that are doing well, we don't track anything. But if they are having any type of concern, they're maybe not eating well, not gaining weight or anything else, and we have a monitoring sheet we can hang up with very specific things to look out for and sign off on.
I did that too, because our shelter struggled with doing daily monitoring for every single animal. So instead I would give them to the animals that I had a concern about. Jenna, how about you guys? Are you doing daily monitoring?
It's kind of the same thing, and more so for like medical cases, if they have like a specific concern, like, this cat was urinating blood or things like that, where it's very specific that a staff member is monitoring. Otherwise, it's just kind of the general, we have like a medical board, and then there's like a behavior area for, people to write down concerns, but not on the physical cage.
What do you feel is one of your biggest challenges with the way that currently rounds are being done?
I think that it's once we've finished the rounds and we've all taken our notes on the census, then we all kind of scatter to go do our next job. And then I think there's a lack of follow through. So we can identify all of these things that we should be working on during rounds, but we don't necessarily assign that to somebody and make sure that it does get done. Like I know for me, I'll run off either to start surgery or to go triage some sick animals and start actually, doing that part of the work, or the shelter supervisor gets pulled off to a VNR meeting or like all these other important meetings. So everybody just kind of gets pulled away, and we haven't really developed a great system for assigning all of those duties. Like I said, when we had that volunteer helping, that was helpful because she could put things on to-do lists. At that time, we had a to-do list for outreach and one for behavior. And the medical one is the only one we still use because we don't always have the outreach person to even run the report. So I think it's that follow-up on what we've said during rounds, hey, we should do this, is actually getting it done once we leave.
What would you each say is the biggest benefit of doing rounds every day in your shelter?
I think the biggest benefit is, I think it helps move the animals through faster, but it also makes sure that they are getting the care that they need. And it gives me a pulse on how the shelter is doing overall, just kind of a general feel for the wellness of the animals based on what resources we have or what resources we're lacking at that time.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of what Ginger said. Being able to kind of more quickly make the best pathway decisions for each animal, kind of get a general idea of where a population's at, what we might be missing, things like that. And then kind of circling back to like actually getting to know the animals a little bit too, which I think is helpful if you're making those pathway decisions, to be able to be like, yes, I've seen this animal day in and day out, and we can kind of track where they started and where they're at now, and kind of what that means for where we want them to go.
I've been in this industry for so long now, more than 20 years. And like, we didn't used to do daily rounds. I started them when I first started becoming a shelter vet, but it wasn't like really a thing anybody did. And it's like, I thought for me, the big benefit was, they stay less time. And then on the flip side of that, which you don't always think about, depending on what role you're in, is then there's fewer animals sitting in the shelter every day needing care. And so it's not just about like speed for the sake of speed. It's like for their best interest to get out quickly, but also so there's fewer animals sitting there who need feeding and cleaning and medical care and are having behavior deteriorating. So any shelter that's not doing daily rounds, I just think they're doing themselves and their animals such a disservice, because you put the time into it and everything else gets easier because you put that time in. And sometimes it feels like you don't have the time. You're like, I can't take an hour for rounds. But if you don't take an hour for rounds, you're going to have twice as many animals sitting there needing all the care. So it's like, it's worth like setting it aside and doing it. And once you start doing it, it gets easier and easier. And it becomes like a habit or a routine. And so I'll just tell you, the shelter that I was at when I was mostly involved with rounds was Yolo County Animal Services here in Northern California. And I was a shelter vet, and I started there at 2011, and they never done rounds. And I just started doing them like every day, the 5 days a week that I was there, and asking somebody to try and do them on the weekends. And like almost immediately, like our length of stay just dropped crazy in a good way. And our live release rate went way the heck up. We were doing other things at the same time being put in place, but the daily rounds made such a huge difference. What are live release rates at each of your facilities right now, if you know them?
We are at about 93.5%.
And I think when I looked a little while ago, we were around 89%.
And just a caveat about like live release rates, this is not about that, but as we focus on animals who really need our help, and we help owners place animals that are easy to place and don't need a shelter intervention, our live release rate is going to be less of a great metric of how well we're doing, because we're going to be selecting the animals who are the most difficult or maybe don't have a positive outcome option, but they need us. And so I ask live release rate just because we're all used to saying it, but it's not in the future going to be the best metric. It's going to be more like lives impacted, animals helped, people helped, all these things that are harder to measure. Anyway, so this is a report that I put together in Crystal for our shelter. And what I did is I just added in all the fields that I needed every day for each and every animal. It's got like where the animal is, and it's got all the things about like their intake type and subtype and status. what day they came in, when they were due out, their signal minty stuff across here, like who they are and their age. Then it also would plug in their medical care dates, whatever name we gave them. It would calculate how many days of holding time it was given, and then it would tell me how many days the animal had been in the shelter so far. They'd had more than 1 impound. It would tell me their total across all impounds.
Oh, that's cool.
And yeah, because some of these guys, come back and forth. And then also it would tell me if they'd been skinned for a chipped or not, intake condition and scheduled spay neuter date. And then I programmed it using conditional formatting to highlight things that might need follow-up or that could be a problem. This one, at the time I ran the report, was due for a vaccine and due for flea control. And like this one, a microchip had been found. So we want to make sure that we followed up on that microchip. So I just tried to make this report do as much work for me as possible. It's like knowing what issues I had at my shelter. Like sometimes due out dates were wrong, and sometimes we didn't get scanned for a chip, and sometimes we missed intake care or we missed follow-up. So this is all stuff you can program in Crystal.
Okay.
It can do that work for you. I asked it to calculate, how many animals were in each room. And then at the very end, because this was what I considered my shelter manager kennel inventory. Oh, and if they had a next to do item, it would show here under next to do. And I commandeered the medications to do list and made it become my honey-do list for assigning tasks to people. So if there was anything on one of those, like this one needed an OIC, officer in charge behavior eval, because there was some concerns about it. But so it would just pull in whatever the next to do is. And then I would print a separate report that was all those honey-do lists.
Okay.
By area of the shelter and hand them out. So like RBT list, DVM list, ACA list, kennel officer list, or whoever. I would pass those around so people could do their things. And then I also made it pull in these cross tabs, is what Crystal calls this. And what it would do is calculate for me number of animals. So in each location, the number of cats in each location, and then also the average length of stay of the animals sitting in that space, so that I could start to see if we were kind of getting some kind of a backlog somewhere, or even just trending overall in a bad direction. And then I also asked it to break it down by age group on this report. And then I did a couple more, one by what kind of hold they had on them.
Okay.
And then I could look for problem areas like rescue in progress starting to build up there, just to see where a backlog might be occurring. If spay neuter was starting to build up, I'd be we got to do more surgeries, right? So looking at average length of stay on that. And then also by current status. So whether they're available for adoption, eval pass, waiting for something, needing eval, or all these things. And then that would also help me tie into my adoption driven capacity. So like I knew my adoption driven capacity for dogs was about 12 to 18. And if I had like 20 or 30 dogs sitting available, I knew I was going to have an issue. Cats, I knew was about 10 to 12. But so just ways to make your software do a lot of the work for you, so that there's less thinking about things that the software can figure out and more thinking about the things that the software can't figure out. And the other thing that I was going to say about daily rounds is you guys you're doing really a great job. And I love that when you can, you're pulling in from multiple departments. But I also feel like it doesn't have to be a barrier. Some shelters right now are struggling so much with staffing. It really is possible to do a decent set of daily rounds with just like 1 or 2 people, and then communicate well after that to the other people, even if they're not on site right then, or if they're busy, using email, like you mentioned, or using like a report, or having a case management meeting intermittently. If you can't do that every day, having the daily rounds and then the case management where you talk about the animals that have more struggles or need more help. So I'm just really encouraging shelters these days not to let it be a barrier if you can't get the robust team together walking through together, because not everybody can, but daily rounds are so flexible that they can be done other ways when you are lacking the resources to do it the most ideal way possible.
There was times where we would FaceTime it together. That was actually kind of fun when the two of us would just FaceTime it, because we didn't have enough people to ever do it together. So I think one struggle is if we have new people coming into the shelter that don't have that background, is showing them the value, like getting them on board, like, come on, let's do this, because it's really going to help kind of close all those gaps for these animals. And then we're all going to be aware of what they need. So
the FaceTime idea is great if you can't exactly be in the same space. And even, we know we call that like synchronous communication, right? But even if you had to do asynchronous, even if you had to like, let's say you had to do rounds by yourself or one other person, but you could like tape and you could say, look, this is what this dog is doing, and send it off to your vet or send it off to your B&T person if they're not there that day, and like get their input and get their opinion. You know, COVID has opened our eyes to the ways that technology can be used. So I think that's a great point, is that like we have the tools, and so we should use them whenever we need to.
So just piecing it together however we can. We're trying.
Yeah, because it's valuable, because it's almost the most valuable thing you can do every day is to actually do the daily rounds and keep the animals healthy and as happy as possible and keep them moving through the shelter. So they're in the shelter as few nights as possible is my goal.
Yep.
But yeah, it starts with the daily rounds. It's one of the most important things you can do in a shelter, if you ask me. Well, you guys, this has been awesome. It's been like so great to hear your perspectives and how things are going for you. And sounds like you're really doing a great job with daily rounds. Even if you don't always think it's perfect, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be done, right? Perfect is the enemy of done, or whatever that saying is, that I'll have to go find a quote for it. I can throw it up on the screen when I say it. Hey, Mandy, are you going to manage our Q&A, or how would we like to do Q&A? We have a few minutes to get started, and then we can move it into Maddie's Pet Forum if we don't answer everything.
Yeah. Lots of questions about the rounds template. We couldn't quite see it, but just want to let everybody know we can share it and we'll share it, right?
Yes.
Along with all the resources, the crystal report, all the things. Okay. Along with the rounds templates, we also want to talk a little bit more about like policies and procedures, and if you have anything written. So just want to be sure we're sharing all the good stuff that's already been created. What tools do you use to transfer efficiently tasks to different teams in the shelter? How do you hand off parts that go to different teams? Do you have one giant rounds going together, or how do we task share when it has multiple teams' interests involved?
Yeah, we talked about that a little. I will say that the way I did it is that I got everything on a to-do list using in Chameleon. There's a to-do feature. I use that. And then I had it separate the pages out by like the person. So like whatever their role was, it knew to put the tasks on the right page. And then the pages went out to everybody. There's higher tech ways of doing that. And Ginger and Jenna, did you guys have some input on that?
In the past, we used the Chameleon to do, but we currently don't have people in some of those positions to run those reports. Really, the medical team is the main one. So a lot of times we'll just send emails to the other people that help with other tasks. And sometimes it's actually written notes on the piece of paper census from Chameleon. If there's administrative things regarding hold dates and things like that, that I might just hand to a person. So right now that's kind of a system that I'd like to improve upon, but that's how we are handling it right now.
Ours is very similar, very low tech. Usually an email roundup at the end. Sending specific things to specific people, but also something we're wanting to improve upon as well.
If I'm just getting started, can you give me an idea of what are some average length of stay?
I can tell for what YOLO was. So we were at 7 to 10 days for dogs, and we were at 4 to 7 days for cats over the past few years while I was there. So that was our overall.
Jenna, do you have an average length of stay?
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head. It's something I can share later on, but I will say, before we started rounds, I started 7 or 8 months ago. We started rounds about 6 months ago. We had, like, when we pulled our census, we had like 3 pages of dogs that were length of stay, like longer than 6 months. And that's now down to like 2 or 3 dogs.
Nice.
And most of their lengths of stay are, still something we want to improve upon. We have a lot that are sitting in like that 2-month range, and shorter, but we're hoping to get that down further.
Very nice. Okay, I know you touched on this a bit in the discussion, but just want to ask, if I'm feeling so overwhelmed that I'm not sure where to start, and I know that if I start doing rounds, things will get better, but what's the one thing I can do if I'm feeling like I'm down on staff and my population's up? What's one thing I can do to start this today?
I would say maybe just start by printing your census and just starting where you can and what you have time to do. Maybe you're having a problem with your cat population, or maybe it's just the dogs. Just print that census and start to walk through and kind of see how that feels and how long it's taking you to get through like one row of dogs. Maybe just give that a try, even if you're by yourself.
What a great tip. Jenna, do you have one?
Yeah, and I think I totally agree with what Ginger said too. I think also starting with that small chunk of animals that you're looking at and looking for, are there any like quick wins or easy fixes in there? Like, is a due out date wrong? Or did this pet have a microchip and we maybe just missed something on the follow through end of reuniting that pet? Like, just quick things like that to help move animals into different pathways, I think helps us feel a little better, but also helps to kind of feel like you're getting somewhere too.
Dr. Delaney?
Oh, I like what they were both saying was like, chunk it out, start somewhere small, or start, somewhere where you can have some success and then move on to your more challenging things. But bit by bit, as you do it, you will see that you'll have fewer animals sitting around. And so it will literally get easier and easier every day. Plus you'll have your routine and you'll know what you're looking for and you'll have more people able to help. So it does just build on itself, but you got to start somewhere. So you got to, jump in there and start somewhere.
Dr. Delaney, do you have any upcoming trainings if I wanted to get started and I need a little bit more guidance? By chance, could I find anything on the Learniverse? By
chance, I am going to put together a boot camp on implementing daily rounds so that like people can learn all the things about it and then have a step-by-step and then get support from people like myself. And also from their other fellow boot campers, because it's going to be a boot camp. And so, yes, super excited that we're going to help people to make that change, get it in place and smooth it out. So yes, that is our next big thing.
Okay, so if you're not already subscribed to the Learniverse list, you guys get over there so you can be the first to know when we're accepting applications and claim your spot. Thanks to Maddie's, all participation in camps are free. So make sure you're on that list. We've run out of time. Boot camps for day. Yes, we have some excitement for that, Delaney. Good. We have run out of time, but we will be meeting right back here, same bat time, same bat channel, May 10th. We're going to be talking about the right care. So make sure when you've registered for this, you've registered for them all. So you're already in. Just make sure you keep an eye on your email, letting you know what's coming around. All the resources that we shared today will be in the Maddie's Pet forum. Go to the forum, check out the talks that are coming up and the resources there, including our recently published The Evolving Role of Triage and Appointment-Based Admissions to Improve Service, Care, and Outcomes in Animal Shelters, talking about the right time. We'll have to get that in there. Yes, if you're a California shelter, we'll see you on the all call in just 1 hour. So I'll see you over there. And everybody just remember, do something special today to celebrate the human-animal bond and the dog that brought us here and still carries on. Maddie's happy birthday. Thank you so much for being here. We will see you in just 2 weeks. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.